Welcome to the Way Left podcast. I'm your host, Brian Vitello. Today, we'll be talking about Project 2025, Mandate for Leadership, put out by the Heritage Foundation and others in the conservative movement. We will talk about what's in it, what's not in it, who did it, who are the people that are involved in it, and what it means. I obviously have a lot of opinions about it, but we will dive deep into this. Okay, so let's do that. Kevin has a promise to America. I promise America that we're going to make it conservative. That's the first point here. This is not an American movement. This is not for all of society. Well, it's for all the society as long as it's a conservative movement. Let's look at what this guy has to say here. So some of the things he has to say, before we dive into the meat of this, first of all, let's understand where they're coming from. Then I'll also talk about the Heritage Foundation. Where they're coming from is the conservative, Christian, evangelical, Christian nationalism, illiberal society. They don't believe in liberalism, and we'll get to that next. Of course, he is pro-life. He's pro-life to the point that if you have rape or incest, no, we're not going to do that. If the lady's wife or girlfriend, woman that's pregnant's life is in jeopardy, can't have an abortion for that. That's the route we're going. We're going to the Handmaid's Tale. Again, this reading is on the website, The Way Left. You can find it under blog tab. You can also find books to read, other recommendations. What are you reading? What are you listening to? What are you watching? We have some good books to read under there. I always suggest read. If you're not reading, you're behind the scales. You got to read. And if you have time to read, read. And if you have time to read, but you're using it up to time to watch this podcast, turn off the podcast and go read, then come back. All right. So he speaks specifically about Roe v. Wade, how they helped to get it overturned by getting people like Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Coney Barrett elected to the Supreme Court, who were proposed by Donald Trump. Mitch McConnell's push for conservative justices. And what does that mean? Well, they lied. They came out and said, well, it was precedent. Roe v. Wade was precedent. But of course, they made caveats. Now Coney Barrett is out saying, well, it was precedent, but it wasn't super precedent. Precedent meaning that if precedent is already set by the Supreme Court, generally speaking, 99 times out of 100, you wouldn't change that precedent. But of course they did. And that's one of the foundations of what they're pushing. They say alternative options to abortion, especially adoption, should receive federal and state support. Well, the federal and states are not doing that, especially in the red states. So they say this knowing that that doesn't exist. The term administrative state, right? The administrative state refers to the policy-making work done by the bureaucracies of all the federal government's departments, agencies, etc. Millions of employees. He references Article 1 of the Constitution, which is kind of an important doc, which is also on my website. Please read it. I'm not saying I'm an expert on it, but I probably know it better than 90% of the lawmakers in Congress. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. Separation of powers. You got the branches of government. You got the executive branch, you got the judicial, and then you have Congress. Congress made up of two, being the Senate and House of Representatives. This exclusive authority was part of the framers' doctrine of separated powers. I'm just stating the obvious here. They not only split the federal government's legislative, executive, and judicial powers into different branches, they also gave each branch checks over the others. Under our Constitution, the legislative branch, Congress, is far and away the most powerful and correspondingly the most accountable to people. That's interesting because based on what Trump's doing, that's not what we're seeing. Trump said he didn't know about Project 2025, but he hired everybody from Project 2025 after. So he was lying. J.D. Vance was lying. They all acted like it didn't exist. And of course, that's the doctrine that they're following. What else does this guy have to say? Let's see. He also has some pretty fun stuff down here. I think we're going to enjoy this. It's his interpretation of the Declaration of Independence, even though they call themselves literalists or textualists, which I'll get to. The Declaration of Independence famously asserted the belief of America's founders that all men are created equal. So if we really dig in, all men, of course, women weren't equal, slaves weren't equal, Native Americans weren't equal. We're all hypocrites. Let's just be clear on what they were saying. Endowed with God-given rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Of course, we were supposed to have religious freedom, but we referenced God. I don't know which God they were talking about. Were they talking about the Native American tribes? Were they talking about the Muslim God? I think they were talking about the Christian God, the Puritan God. Of course, they were. It's the pursuit of happiness that is central to America's heroic experiment in self-government. And what he says is when the founders spoke of pursuit of happiness, what they really meant, and Mr. Roberts and everybody else's, and I'm sure this was in some text, is the pursuit of blessedness. That is, an individual must be free to live as his creator ordained. creator. Again, is that, which creator is that, right? Is it just one creator? Is it the Christian creator? Is it Mormonism? This is where I get confused by the conservative movement, but I'm not confused. I know what they are when it comes to things like this. A true conservative is for religious freedom. A conservative movement by the Christian evangelicals is a Christian democracy. And that's what this is. An individual must let the Creator. Our Constitution grants each of us the liberty to do not what we want, but what we ought. Those are some interesting comments. I think we're getting a feel for what this guy is about. We'll get into the details of Project 2000. Good to understand the people that are putting this up in front of our faces. So let's talk about Kevin Roberts. Who is he? Who is this guy? This PhD. He's been on the conservative movement, pushing, has a PhD. Clearly, he is a scholar, which would probably mean he's an elitist, but he's not an elitist because he's a conservative. Only leftists can be elitist, of course. Of course, we understand that. So let's try to understand who he is. Who is he? Well, here's a good one. This is who he is. So for those that don't know, Viktor Orban is the authoritarian leader of Hungary, has pushed forth what he calls illiberal democracy, or Christian democracy. I don't know if he's saying theocracy, but basically what he's pushing for is to get rid of liberalism. Liberalism is dead. What does liberalism mean? It means freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of thought. It's the true basis. It's not the same as liberal. Liberal is just what has been coined as a bad term for left, and then right's conservative. Those are generic terms. Liberalism is the basis of our democracy. It is a liberal society. Liberal democracies reign. That's what we want. We want the society to help the individual, not to be individuals and not help society. So here we go. Here's Mr. Roberts telling us exactly what he wants to do with Project 2025. The Heritage Foundation has long admired Orban. In a 2022 interview with Hungarian Conservative, sure they're well represented in Hungary, at least in Orban's cabinet, which he has relatives. Sounds familiar to the Trump administration, of course. Quid pro quo, would you? Roberts said, modern Hungary is not just a model for conservative statecraft, but the model. And who does Orban have a good relationship with? Oh, it's the same guy as Trump, Putin. And this is stating facts. Orban is not an advocate against Putin. In 2023, Roberts brought the Heritage Foundation into formal partnership with the Danube Institute, a conservative think tank funded by, guess who? Orban's government. And guess where Victor visited before President Trump was even president this second time? Oh, that's right, Mar-a-Lago. And guess who was there? J.D. Vance, and your friend and mine, Mr. Roberts, and I'm sure Russell Vought, who we'll get into. The point being here is let's understand where this is coming from. It doesn't mean all the ideas are bad. Nobody has completely bad ideas. I mean, there are some, if we're honest. There are some people out there that don't have any good ideas. But let's assume they have some good ideas. Well, we need to know where these people are coming from. Who else is involved in this great piece of the project, the mandate for leadership, the conservative movement? Well, there's another guy. He's a wonderful economist. His name is Ron Navarro. He is Trump's right-hand man on tariffs. He wants to take us back to Hoovervilles in the 1930s, Great Depression. He wants to take us back to McKinley. Notice how Trump changed back Denali, the mountain in Alaska, to McKinley, because guess what McKinley did? He put in tariffs, destroyed the economy, got shot, and then they actually had a good Republican who ended up going progressive, his name being Teddy Roosevelt. But let's look at Peter Navarro. Now, this one's funny. So for those that don't know, a muse, what's a muse, right? A muse is like Plato and Socrates. You have this person that you talk about to kind of explain what you're trying to get to. So here's a funny one. Peter Navarro, a Trump economic advisor to Trump, uses a fictional expert's name, was Ron Vara. It's an anagram of Navarro. So he uses himself as his muse to defend his philosophies. That's another guy involved in Project 2025 who also denied that it existed before Trump was elected in 2024. Again, how? I don't know. And I know we all look at each other sometimes, even the people that voted for him, and go, what the fuck just happened? Well, another reason why I'm here. And here's another guy involved. Your lovely couch potato, that wonderful guy who called Trump America's Hitler, who is now the vice president of the United States, the flip-flopping jackass, pudgy little couch potato, J.D. Vance. Let's bring him in. Okay, here we go. Here's J.D. Here's what J.D.'s forward says. He does an analogy. He says, I sometimes used to articulate what the previous generation of conservatives got right and wrong. So we have this garden, and it was maintained by modern liberalism. That would be freedom of speech, freedom of religion, so on. And we'll dive deeper on liberalism in another podcast or maybe here today. They overdo it. The soil is bad because of those damn socialist modern liberals. The conservatives tried to fight it. They made some mistakes. Here's what he's saying. We made a lot of mistakes as a country in the 1960s and 1970s. But to bring the garden back to health, it is not enough to undo the mistakes of the past. The garden needs not just to stop adding a terrible solution, though it does need that. It needs to be recultivated. We need the old conservative movement to change. It's fine to take a laissez-faire approach, as Kevin Roberts said. Again, this is a guy who said he didn't know what Project 2025 was, but he was involved with Kevin Roberts. When you are in the safety of the sunshine, but when the twilight descends and you hear the wolves, you've got to circle the wagons and load the muskets. I wonder where violence comes from. I wonder where hate comes from. We are now this is J.D. Vance. We are now all realizing that it's time to circle the wagons and load the muskets. In the fights that lay ahead, these ideas are an essential weapon. He wants to get rid of liberalism. He wants to support philosophies like Viktor Orban's out of Hungary, illiberal democracies, Christian democracies. J.D. Vance actually says now he's a baby Christian because he just got into the religion, even though his leader, Peter Thiel, is pushing the Antichrist and discussions of such. So I'm very critical of the people that put this together, but I still dug into it and read it. And so I'm going to go through some of the things that they talk about, and I'm going to tell you what I think about those. And there are some really, really, really good ideas involved in here, none of which seem like they're going to correlate with what Trump is doing. But let's go through those. I've got a list here. Just going to kind of go through it. Let's have some fun with this. So they start off with a very good philosophy. We need workforce training. We need upskilling initiatives. So we need trades. We need, community college type events. We need social interaction after college, volunteering. Those are all really great. We need to support that. How are we going to support that? I guess the states are going to pay for that because the federal government's getting rid of the Department of Education. Not sure how we're going to fund it, but those are good ideas. Ones that we should all believe in. All Americans, all people on Earth, all Earthens, I like to say. We're all from one planet. It's Earth. Now, the way they're going to do this is they're going to grow their way out of debt. So what does that mean? Grow your way out of that. This is the conservative philosophy that Ronald Reagan put into place, influenced by some economists that you would consider to be pretty smart, like Friedman. I also have his writings on my website that you should read. He's a very intelligent man, conservative, but he has some very social views that I would agree with. I wouldn't agree with all his takes on a conservative philosophy. But the idea is that we're not going to tax the rich as much. We're going to reduce taxes on the wealthy. We're going to reduce capital gains. We're going to reduce investment income taxes. We're going to reduce all those taxes. And what we're going to do is we're going to shoot the economy up and all that money is going to come in. We're going to reduce the government to nothing and it's all going to flow downhill. And we're just going to have this great education system. It seems like a great philosophy. Never works, right? Since Reagan, the debt's done nothing but go up, but taxes have gone down. It's a whole nother discussion we'll have on the tax bill. But we're going to grow our way out of debt. I completely disagree with that. I'm not saying you have to tax till you fall off a cliff. 95% of us are being taxed off the cliff. The top 5% are being taxed so they can ride around, not in yachts, but I've been saying for 20 years, tax me more, and all they do is tax me less. Now, I'm not in the top 1%. I've done well for myself, but I begged for tax. Fossil fuels, they want energy independence. This is what Project 2020, it talks a lot about this. It even talks about sustainable energy. But what it does go into is climate change is a hoax. That climate change is non-existent. We need to stop bashing oil and gas. Well, I'm going to say something here pretty clear. If you don't believe in some form of global warming or climate change due to man-made institutions, industrialization, then you're a fucking idiot. That's all I got to say. And if you don't like it, don't like it, because it's true. And I'm going to have a report by Exxon that shows that it's true. They were the ones that actually came up with the philosophy, the science in the 1970s and said, this is what's going to happen if we do this. And guess what's happening? But no, that's all false now. The Rockefellers sued Exxon, asked them what it was about. They got it. And then they said, oh, this is all bad science now. But at the time, it was great science. It's real. Does it mean we have to stop production? Does it mean we need to shut down the world? No, we can't do that. We're not capable of stepping back. But we need a better path forward, and that includes sustainable energy, and it includes wind and solar and geothermal and hydro and other ways, and it needs incentives to do that. To say that oil and gas is going away is untrue. To say it's the only solution is bullshit. And to say it's not destructive, burning something. Hey, I'll tell you what, If you don't believe in it, go have a party in your garage and it gets cold, just turn on your car. You're going to get sick as fuck from carbon monoxide. So you just think that stuff just dissipates? Come on. Truly conservatism, no progressivism, no liberal. It's all right wing, and it's all based on traditional family values based from a Christian evangelical standpoint. Women's rights are hindered. Pete Hegseth, your famous jackass Secretary of War now, it follows a pastor that says women shouldn't vote. Charlie Kirk wanted women to stay home and cook and have babies. Great. That's what we want. I guess that's traditional family values. They also want constitutional originalists or textualists in their judges, conservative judges like Scalia, who's dead now. I find that funny, especially when it comes to the Second Amendment. Because if you read the Second Amendment, it talks guns and state militias. And basically that was to protect the states from don't tread on me from the federal government. So if the federal government tried to do something, a state militia could protect not only the state, but protect the state's rights. So now we're not at that point. Everybody can have a gun. And I guess that's okay with everybody, even though I had a school shooting the other day that got no press. Charlie Kirk's death got press. Both deserved press. Violence is not the answer. Guns sure in the fuck aren't the answer. If you own a gun, you're 3 times more likely to be shot by a gun. So it's kind of like you're more likely to get in a car accident if you're in a car. I mean, it's shocking. The broader point there is they want to believe that the Constitution, now at this point, not in the past, but at this point, they want it to stay as a static document. They want it to be like the Bible. It's not going to change. No, the Constitution is a living document. It should be a living document. That's why we have 26 amendments, and that's probably why we need 20 or 30 more. And I could go through a list of what I would want in that thing. But it's a living document. It is not, we can interpret what they've said, but we also need to modify it for the modern era. If we talk about the Second Amendment, they had muskets. You know what? Everybody can have a musket, right? But no, we get to change it. That's not originalist and textualist. That's not. And they'll argue that it is. And I say bullshit. So I disagree with that. They want more power with the executive. Well, that's working out fine. Donald Trump's done a great job of doing, I mean, it's not his philosophy. Donald Trump's not an ideologue. He's a narcissist who wants a clap on the back and, deny that he fucks strippers while his wife has a baby at home, all that, right? But the executive powers is a facility that you can use. It's supposed to be an emergency action. Of course, everything is an emergency to Donald Trump and to his group of conservative Christian nationalists. And that's a load of shit. And hopefully the Supreme Court throws out the tariffs. Whole nother conversation that we'll have. Deregulation. I agree with some deregulation. We do need to eliminate some hurdles. We can talk about the abundance movement, Ezra Klein and Thompson talking about how we need to, we do need to pay attention to the environment, but we can't pay attention so much that we don't grow. Like I said, people bitch about traffic and they pitch about homelessness in Denver. And I said, well, you know what? Yeah, there's a solution. Move to like Salina, Kansas. They don't have a lot of traffic. They don't have a lot of homeless. Guess what else they don't have? They don't have jobs. They don't have culture. Now, I'm not throwing Salina under the bus. What I'm saying is there's a price for growth, and you have to manage that growth. You can't do this by deregulating everything. They especially want to deregulate and get rid of the Department of Education. They want to get rid of the EPA. So the EPA is basically wiping out all rules. So you can basically start a mine, leak all the toxic substances in the water, not worry about as long as you get minerals out and you're not culpable. That's not a world I want to live in. It's ridiculous. And then we're taking our fluoride out of the water by RFK, the heroin addict, former heroin addict, fucking conspiracy theorist, junior. So I don't agree with that. Again, this leads back to trickle-down economics. It's give the rich all they want, and hopefully they'll piss all over the rest of us so that we get something. That's not working. The last 40 years, 30 to 40 years have been decimated, the upper middle class to below. Our quality of life and our standard of living has gone up, but our ability to live properly, afford things, has gone down. Economic nationalism, obviously, they say they want to work with the world. Actually, Project 2025 does talk about working with our neighbors, the EU, not our neighbor, but alliances, the EU, Canada, and Mexico. Those are 3 of the big ones. Even NATO in some way, even the WTO, which is the World Trade Organization. And guess what Trump has done? He's made enemies with everybody. So he isn't following that script, but at some point, that's the script they want anyway. They want isolationism. They want protectionism. You do have to protect yourself, but isolation and protectionism gets you Hungary and Belarus and Russia. And if you just want oil and gas, there's a whole funny thing. All Russia is, Russia's economy is as big as Italy's. They're this huge country. They're basically a gas station with freaking nuclear bombs. If that's what we want to be, then let it rip. Hungary's economy has dove. A lot of EU countries are thriving. Hungary's is not. But Orban doesn't care. He's like Maduro in Venezuela. He doesn't give a fuck about the people. He gives a fuck about control. And what's the term? Absolute power corrupts abso-fucking-lutely. And we've gone too far down that road from both the left and the right and worldwide. They do want to promote private sector solutions. I agree with that. Public and private institutions that work together. What I don't agree with is that getting 10% of intel in the government. Because you know what that's called? That's called communism. That's not called partnership. That's called communism. Now, I do believe that the military-industrial complex, as Eisenhower said, is too strong. And we have problems with lobbying, and we have problems with a lot of that grift and quid pro quo, which is you do a favor for me and I'll do a favor for you, even if it's not legal. What Trump did with Zelensky, said, hey, I'll give you the money if you give me dirt on Hunter Biden. That's our president. But how do you do that if you're not building a strong government? If you're only building a defense, they want limited government. So they want their oligarchs and they want their Manchurian candidate as the president. And then they just want ICE and they want the government and they want the national defense or the Secretary of War or the War Department. Sounds like that's all they want. So how do you do the public-private partnerships? Not sure. I like the line of thinking. I like the line of the topic. I don't like their line of thinking. Again, traditional values, Christian nationalism and evangelicals gets a little extreme. Climate change, we've talked about, military buildup. They want to build out, they want infrastructure. They talk about infrastructure in Project 2025. They talk about growing broadband across the country for rural areas and for urban areas. That's funny because Biden had something, and you could say it wasn't the best plan, the infrastructure plan, started going into something. So we've seen some of that money in Colorado on roads, and he nixed it. He did executive power, Donald Trump. Okay, so we don't need infrastructure. Civil engineers across the country are like, our dams, our waterways are not good, and we're not spending the money on it. And I guess the idea of Project 2025 is the states are going to pay for it without any federal assistance. Don't you need a good leader? Isn't that the idea of being the United States of America? That was fun. There's a lot more to come out of this. A lot of other links to Viktor Orban. We'll talk about Tucker Carlson and Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen and Jesse Burnham's book on Machiavellianism. The point here is Project 2025 is out there, was lied about, was manipulated. Russell Vought, who I had brought up earlier, is the head of the OMB. He is one of the writers of contributors to Project 2025. He acted like Donald Trump did not know. That was a lie. He then got hired by Donald Trump. He wants to traumatize the federal workforce. Another guy that we could go along with, Kevin Roberts. And it seems like a little bit of a white nationalist movement too. And I don't want to say that, but a Christian evangelical white nationalist movement. It bothers me. Hope it bothers you. So the questions that we should ask ourselves is the conservative movement an American movement? Is it divisive or is it bringing us together? We need to address the ideas. We need to read it. We need to talk about these things. But what we don't need to do is just take it. And that's what we're doing with Donald Trump and Project 2000. And I'll leave you with a quote, as some of you know that know me from my favorite band, Radiohead, ambition can make you look pretty ugly. And thank you for watching The Way Left.